Welcome to A Sleepy Geographer, a quiet corner where we wander through the deepest chapters of our planet's story. Tonight, we are traveling into the cold, into the quiet, into a time when the world was draped in a cloak of white. This is the story of the Ice Ages, Earth's long, rhythmic slumbers and its sudden, dramatic awakenings. Before we begin this journey into the deep freeze, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you in a place where winter's bite is still sharp, or are you somewhere warm, perhaps dreaming of a frosty morning? If these quiet explorations of our planet's past bring you a moment of wonder, I'd be so grateful if you'd gently tap the like button and subscribe. To those already subscribed, thank you. You are the steady, constant warmth that makes this channel a home. Now close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to dream. Dream of a world unlike any you have ever known. Imagine the familiar, the rolling hills, the deep valleys, the coastlines we trace on maps, but now buried, not under a gentle blanket of snow that melts by afternoon, but under ice. Ice that is not inches thick, but miles. Ice so colossal, so unimaginably heavy that it presses down upon the very crust of the Earth, making the planet itself groan under its weight. This is an ice age. Not a single winter, not a bad season, but a state of being for the entire globe. A long, deep sleep where the rules of life change and the very geography of our world is rewritten. The air is different here. It is silent, but for the moan of the wind over 1,000 miles of barren, frozen expanse. It is dry, for much of the world's water is locked away, frozen in time. The light is different too, a brilliant, blinding white that reflects off the ice under a sky of the deepest, most profound blue. And yet, for all its harshness, there is a haunting, terrible beauty to this world. Sunlight catches the razor-edged ridges of Sirax, making them glow like crystal fortresses. The low sun of the polar summer casts long blue shadows that dance across the ice, painting a landscape of sublime sculpture. In the stillness, you can hear the heartbeat of the planet, a deep, low creak, a distant thunder as a carving glacier sends a new iceberg on its journey into the sea. These icebergs, cathedrals of ice, dot the oceans, their submerged halves, glowing with an unearthly aquamarine light. This is not a dead world. It is a sleeping one. Life is still here, but it is life on the edge. On the margins of the great white sheets, in the vast cold grasslands that border the ice, great beasts tread. Shaggy mammoths with tusks like twisted ancient trees moving in herds against the wind. Giant elk with antlers so wide they seem to frame the mountains behind them. Predators with teeth designed for a world of leather and frost. The saber-toothed cat, the dire wolf. And somewhere, small bands of humans wrapped in furs, their breath pluming in the frigid air, looking out at this immense, white world with a mixture of fear, awe, and ingenuity. This world is our world. It is the world of only 20,000 years ago, a mere blink in the deep time of our planet. The evidence of this slumber is all around us if we know how to look. The gentle, rolling hills of the Midwest are not hills at all, but the debris left by a retreating glacier, a moraine. That crystal-clear lake you love to visit is a kettle lake, a block of leftover ice that melted and filled with water. The steeped, majestic fjords of Norway, the deep Great Lakes, the scratched and grooved bedrock in Central Park, all of these are scars, the gentle memories left by the ice. We are living in an interglacial period, a warm, comfortable dream within a much longer, colder night. Our climate, our coastlines, our very civilizations are built upon the aftermath of the Great Thaw. So in this series, we will explore this long sleep. We will discover what lulls the Earth into this frozen state and what stirs it awake again. We will walk with the creatures of the ice and try to solve the mystery of their disappearance. We will see how this icy past has shaped the human story and ask what the future may hold for the great glacial cycles. This is a journey to a world of white, a journey into deep time. So settle in and let us step quietly into the cold together. In our last moment together, we stood in the haunting silence of a white world, a planet transformed. But this is not a random event. A world does not simply fall asleep by accident. Such a profound transformation requires a cause, a rhythm, a reason. Tonight, we uncover the clockwork, the immense celestial mechanics that guide our planet between long winters and warm summers. To understand the Ice Age, we must first understand its place in the deep, breathing rhythm of Earth's climate. We often use the term Ice Age to speak of that time when mammoths walked, but to a geologist the term holds a grander, more precise meaning. An Ice Age, or a glacial period, is a long interval of time, millions of years long, when the Earth's surface is characterized by the presence of extensive ice sheets. They are not permanent, they are chapters, and these chapters exist within a much, much larger book. To see the full story, we must pull our view back, not thousands, but hundreds of millions of years. From this vantage point, we see that Earth's climate has not been constant. It has oscillated between two dominant states, two seasons on a geological scale. We call them the greenhouse world and the icehouse world. Imagine a greenhouse world. This is Earth in its lusher, more tropical state. There are no permanent ice caps at the poles. Palm trees might grow in Alaska. Crocodiles bask on the shores of the Arctic Ocean. The world is warm, humid, and the sea levels are dramatically higher, flooding the continents to create shallow, life-filled inland seas. The planet is a steamy, vibrant paradise. The age of the dinosaurs was largely a greenhouse world. And then there is the icehouse world. This is our current state, a world where the planet maintains permanent ice sheets, even during its warmest intervals. The poles are cold, crowned with ice that ebbs and flows but never fully disappears. Our current icehouse period began roughly 34 million years ago when glaciers first began to cling to the high latitudes of Antarctica and didn't let go. Now within an icehouse world, the story gets more intricate because even here the ice does not stay constant. It pulses, it breathes. This is where we find our familiar ice ages, what scientists call glacial periods, the times when the ice sheets expand dramatically, covering much of North America and Europe. And separating these deep freezes are the brief, warm respites called interglacial periods. The warm period we live in now, the Holocene, is one such interglacial, a fleeting thaw in a longer winter. So to be precise, we live in an interglacial period, the Holocene, which is part of a larger ice age, the Quaternary glaciation, featuring pulses of glacial and interglacial periods, which is itself part of an even grander icehouse world, a planet with permanent ice caps that began 34 million years ago. It is a climate of layers like nested dolls of time. The shift between a greenhouse and an icehouse world is a monumental one, driven by the slow tectonic dance of the continents. Mountain ranges rise, changing wind patterns. Ocean currents are rerouted, altering the flow of heat around the globe. Vast amounts of carbon dioxide, the planet's insulating blanket, can be slowly drawn down from the atmosphere and locked away in rocks and seabeds, allowing the planet to cool. These are the grand geological levers that set the stage, but the quicker rhythmic pulse, the shift between a glacial and an interglacial period within an ice age that is governed by a more delicate clock. A clockwork of orbits and tilts, this is the true heartbeat of the ice. a rhythm so precise we can trace its echo back through millennia and predict its cadence forward into the future. It is a celestial dance between the earth and the sun. But that is a story for our next chapter, a story of wobbles and stretches and subtle shifts in the light that reaches our world, the silent metronome that ticks off the ages of ice and the ages of green. Until then, consider the immense scale of it all, the planet itself shifting between entire climatic states over eons. It reminds us that change is the only true constant, that our comfortable world is but a warm moment in a much longer, colder story, a single bright chord in a slow and patient symphony. In our last quiet moment, we spoke of the grand states of our world, the deep freezes of the icehouse and the tropical expanses of the greenhouse. But these are the stages. Tonight we meet the players, the subtle celestial forces that provide the rhythm for the great ice to advance and retreat. This is the story of a code, a mathematical rhythm written not in numbers, but in the very movement of our planet through the void, a gentle astronomical nudge that rocks the cradle of Earth's climate. The story begins not with the institution, but with a solitary mind, that of a Serbian civil engineer and mathematician named Milutin Milankovic. During the early 20th century, while much of the world was engulfed in war, Milankovic was a prisoner of war, confined and isolated. But his mind was free to wander the cosmos. With little more than paper and pen, he dedicated himself to a single monumental task: to calculate the changing amounts of sunlight falling on the Earth's latitudes across vast stretches of time. He was searching for a pulse, a heartbeat. His work, refined over decades, gave us the Milankovic cycles, the idea that variations in Earth's orbit and rotation are the metronome that ticks off the ages of ice. It is a theory of breathtaking elegance, and it holds the key to understanding our planet's long sleep. There is not one cycle, but three separate rhythms, each with its own tempo, overlapping and intertwining like instruments in a cosmic symphony. The first rhythm is the slowest, the deepest drumbeat. It is called eccentricity. Imagine Earth's orbit around the Sun is not a perfect circle, but a gentle oval. This is its eccentricity. Over a cycle of about 100,000 years, this oval becomes more pronounced, and then almost circular again. Why does this matter? Because when the orbit is more elongated, there is a point where the Earth is significantly farther from the Sun, receiving less of its warmth. This doesn't cause winter, the seasons are caused by tilt, but it can make a hemisphere's winter slightly longer and colder, a small but crucial nudge that allows ice to accumulate. The second rhythm is the tilt of the Earth's axis. Our planet does not spin upright, it leans over like a sleepy top. This is its obliquity, but this tilt is not constant. Over a cycle of 41,000 years, it wobbles between about 22.1 and 24.5 degrees. Think of a lamp shining on a globe. When the tilt is greater, the seasons become more extreme. The summers are warmer, but crucially, the winters are colder. It is the intensity of the winter cold that matters most for growing ice sheets. A colder winter means more snow survives the following summer. Layer upon layer, the ice begins to build. The third rhythm is the most subtle, the most graceful. It is called precession. Imagine a spinning top. Just as it begins to slow down, its axis starts to trace a slow, wobbly circle in the air. The Earth does the same. The direction our North Pole points toward slowly shifts, tracing a circle in the sky over a cycle of about 26,000 years. This changes which star is our North Star, a slow, celestial drift. But precession has a powerful effect on our seasons. It determines whether a given hemisphere is tilted toward the Sun at its closest or farthest point in its elliptical orbit. Right now, the southern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun when Earth is closest, giving it slightly more intense summers. In 13,000 years, this will reverse. This cycle dictates the timing of the seasons within the grander drumbeats of tilt and orbit. Alone, each of these cycles is a subtle variation, a minor change in the amount and distribution of sunlight reaching our planet, a fraction of a percent, barely a whisper, but when they align, when the orchestra of orbits falls into a certain harmony, that is when the magic happens. When the northern hemisphere summers are cool enough and the winters cold and long enough that the snow of one year does not fully melt before the next winter arrives, this is the trigger. This is the gentle hand that pulls the white blanket. Over the continents, it is not a violent shove into an ice age, but a whisper, a suggestion, a series of cool summers that allows ice to gain a foothold, to reflect more sunlight, to cool the air around it, beginning a feedback loop that eventually plunges the entire planet into a deep freeze. Milankovitch's code, written in isolation, has been proven right. Ice cores drilled from the heart of Antarctica and Greenland contain a frozen record of past climates. And when we read this record, we find the same rhythms he predicted: the 100,000-year pulse of the orbit, the 41,000-year heartbeat of the tilt, the elegant 26,000-year wobble of precession. His mathematics are there, frozen in the ice. It is a humbling thought that the fate of continents, the advance of glaciers a mile thick, the very survival of species could be guided by the slow, patient, and beautiful dance of a planet around its star. Our world is rocked to sleep by the gentle, gravitational hands of the solar system, and when the cycles fall out of this alignment, the Earth is nudged awake again. But what happens during that awakening? That is a story of torrents and floods of biblical proportion, a story for our next chapter. In our last chapter, we uncovered the clockwork, the celestial rhythms of Milankovitch, the wobble, the tilt, the stretch of Earth's orbit, that provide the gentle initial nudge towards ice. But a nudge is not enough. You cannot build any ice sheet a mile thick with a whisper. You need an amplifier. Tonight, we turn our gaze from the heavens to the very air we breathe. We meet the invisible players in this drama, the gases that form Earth's thermostat. This is the story of the interplay between the astronomical code and the atmospheric chemistry that truly locks the world into its deep freeze or its thaw. Imagine the Milankovitch cycles as a hand gently turning a dial. This dial changes the amount of sunlight reaching the far northern latitudes where ice sheets are born. But the planet's response to that dial is controlled by its own internal thermostat. And the primary settings on that thermostat are carbon dioxide and methane. These are the greenhouse gases. They form a delicate blanket around our planet, transparent to the sun's incoming light, but opaque to the heat that tries to escape back into space. They are what keep our world from being a frozen ball of rock. But when the concentration of these gases changes, so does the temperature of the entire globe. So what is the connection? How does a slight change in sunlight caused by a wobble in space become a planet-altering ice age? It begins with that initial astronomical nudge. A series of cool summers in the high latitudes, dictated by the cycles, allows winter snow to persist. This expanded snow and ice cover is brilliantly white. It reflects sunlight back into space, a process known as albedo. Less heat is absorbed. The local air cools further. This allows even more ice to form, which reflects even more sunlight. This is a powerful positive feedback loop, and it starts the world down the path to cooling. But here is where the atmosphere takes the lead. As the planet cools, remarkable things begin to happen. The cooler oceans can absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, like a cold glass of soda, staying fizzier than a warm one. On land, growing ice sheets scour the earth, reducing plant life that would otherwise draw down CO2. The changing climate can also alter ocean currents, bringing nutrient-rich deep water to the surface and fueling plankton blooms that consume carbon. The result? The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere begins to fall, and as CO2 falls, the planet's insulating blanket thins. More heat escapes, the world cools even further. This cooling allows the ice to expand even more, which increases the albedo effect, which cools the planet further, which allows the oceans to absorb even more CO2. On and on it goes, a cascade of cooling, a runaway train into the cold. The Ice Age is no longer just an orbital suggestion. It is a full-blown atmospheric reality. The initial nudge has been amplified 100-fold by Earth's own chemistry. The greenhouse has become an icebox. Methane, an even more potent but shorter-lived greenhouse gas, plays a supporting role. As wetlands and tundra are frozen or drowned by changing sea levels, their vast stores of methane are switched on or off, adding another layer of fine-tuning to the global thermostat. But what is most astonishing is that we can see this happen. We have a record, that tiny bubble of air trapped in the ancient ice. That is a time capsule. By drilling deep into the ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland, scientists have pulled up a frozen archive of the Earth's atmosphere going back nearly 1 million years. And when they analyze those bubbles and compare the gas levels to the temperature recorded in the ice itself, the correlation is breathtakingly clear. It is a perfect dance. When CO2 and methane levels are high, the world is warm. When they fall, the world cools. They rise and fall in lockstep with the temperature, amplifying the rhythm set by the Milankovitch cycles. The proof is there, trapped in the ice. The same process works in reverse to end an ice age. A slight orbital shift brings a bit more summer sun to the northern ice sheets. They begin to melt ever so slightly. The dark land and ocean water exposed beneath them have a low albedo. They absorb heat. This begins to warm the local air. Warm oceans then begin to release their stored carbon dioxide like a warm soda going flat. The greenhouse blanket thickens, the world warms further, melting more ice, exposing more dark ground, releasing more CO2, until the ice sheets are in full retreat. The orbital cycles provide the spark, but the greenhouse gases are the fuel. It is a delicate, powerful, and beautiful feedback system. It reveals a planet that is not a passive rock, but a deeply interconnected system. A shift in orbit changes the sunlight, which changes the ice, which changes the oceans, which changes the air, which changes the entire world. We are living in the warm peak of this cycle. Our interglacial is a period of high greenhouse gases, naturally released from the oceans at the end of the last ice age. But now a new variable has been introduced. A species that has learned to dig up and burn ancient carbon, releasing it back into the atmosphere at a rate far beyond the natural cycle. But that is a story for another time. For now, we understand the ancient mechanism, the clockwork of the heavens, and the silent, chemical breath of the earth itself working in concert to rock the cradle of climate. Next time, we will step into this world they created together. We will visit the Pleistocene in all its frigid, magnificent glory. We have traced the mechanisms, the celestial clockwork and the atmospheric chemistry that built the stage. Now the curtain rises. Let us step from the realm of theory into the world of reality. Let us step out of our time and into the Pleistocene. This is not an abstract age of ice. It is a living, breathing, roaring world. Welcome to the grandest show on Earth, 20,000 years ago. The first thing you would notice is the light. It is a clean, hard light, sharpened by the dry, cold air. The sun, low on the horizon even, in summer casts long blue shadows from every dip and mound in the land. And the wind, a constant, low moan sweeping across 1,000 miles of open grassland. This is not the familiar, forested north we know today. This is the mammoth steppe, a vast, cold, and incredibly productive ecosystem that stretched from Spain to Alaska. A sea of tough, nutrient-rich grasses, herbs, and low shrubs designed to survive the bitter cold and the hungry mouths that grazed upon it. And what mouths they were. This was the age of titans, the megafauna, creatures of such scale and grandeur that they seemed the stuff of myth, but they were real. Picture them, herds of woolly mammoths, the emperors of the steppe. Not the elephants of Africa, but beasts adapted for the cold, with long, shaggy coats of dark hair, a thick layer of fat, and enormous sweeping tusks polished from digging through snow for forage. You would feel their approach before you saw them, a deep, subsonic rumble through the frozen ground. Alongside them, the woolly rhinoceros, a tank of a creature clad in thick, plate-like skin and a long, flat horn perfect for sweeping snow aside. Grunting, solitary, and formidable. Look there, moving with an oddly graceful gait for its size, the giant ground sloth. Not the slow, tree-dwelling sloth of the tropics, but a beast as large as a modern elephant, covered in shaggy fur, capable of rising on its hind legs to strip leaves from trees we would consider tall. And in the shadows, the predators, the scimitar, cat Homotherium, with its shorter, serrated canines built for slashing, and the legendary American lion, larger than any lion alive today, a pale, powerful ghost stalking the valleys. This was a world of giants, giant bison with horns spanning 6 feet, giant deer, the Irish elk, with antlers so wide and ornate they seem impossible. This was the Pleistocene. Not a barren, frozen wasteland, but a thriving, pulsing, and fiercely competitive ecosystem. A world of profound beauty and profound danger. But this teeming life existed under a looming presence. A wall of white on the horizon. The glaciers. To travel south or north, depending on your location, was to approach the ice. And it was not a single, clean edge. It was a chaotic, tortured frontier, a land of permafrost, ground frozen solid, hundreds of meters deep, a land of strange ice formations, pingos, frost heaves, and patterned ground, and then the ice itself. Imagine standing before the Laurentide ice sheet. It is not a hill of snow, it is a presence, a cliff of dirty blue-white ice that stretches not across the valley but across the entire continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and so high into the atmosphere that it creates its own weather. This is not a static thing, it is alive. You can hear it, the constant creak and groan of its immense weight, the distant thunder as a serac collapses, the meltwater rivers roaring out from its base, choked with rock flour, carving immense channels. The air near the ice is cold, damp, and carries the smell of stone and ancient, compressed snow. This is the portrait of the Pleistocene, not a monochrome, world of white, but a world of stark, vivid contrasts. The deep brown of the mammoth's coat against the golden grass, the brilliant blue of a crevasse against the grey sky, the thunderous movement of a herd against the immense, silent pressure of the ice. It was a world of incredible abundance and incredible fragility, a equilibrium maintained by a razor's edge of climate, food, and competition, a world that for a long time worked. But equilibrium, in nature, is often a temporary state. The ice was not a permanent resident, it was a visitor, and its visit was nearing its end. The orbital cycles were shifting, the great trigger was being pulled, the thaw was coming, and with the thaw would come change, and with change would come extinction. But that is a story of endings. For now, let us hold this portrait in our minds, a world of giants walking in the long shadow of the ice, a world that was and is known no more. Next time, we will watch the ice itself advance. We will learn how a snowflake falling on Baffin Island can become part of a continent-crushing force, the incredible journey of a glacier's growth. In our last portrait, we stood in awe of the Pleistocene world, teeming with giants under the shadow of immense ice. But such monuments of ice do not appear overnight. They are not summoned. They are built, patiently, persistently, one single, fragile crystal at a time. Tonight, we witness the birth of a glacier. We follow the journey of a single snowflake and see how its tiny, fleeting existence contributes to a force that can carve continents and define ages. Our story begins not with ice, but with snow. A storm sweeps across Baffin Island, or northern Quebec, some 25,000 years ago. The air is cold, holding little moisture. It is a dry, biting cold. And from this cold, a crystal forms, a single hexagonal snowflake, infinitely complex, beautiful, and fragile. It drifts down silently from the grey sky, and it lands on a high, barren plateau. This is where the transformation begins. Normally, a snowflake like this would melt in the spring sun. Its brief life ended. But here, at the dawn of an ice age, something is different. The orbital rhythms have aligned. The summers are just a little too cool. The autumn snows arrive just a little too early. So, our snowflake does not melt. It survives. It is soon buried by the next storm, and the next, and the next. Layer upon layer accumulates. And as it is buried, the delicate arms of the snowflake begin to change. The tiny points and lattices, so vulnerable, sublimate. They turn directly from solid ice into water vapor. That vapor then refreezes onto the colder, thicker center of the flake. The beautiful crystal collapses in on itself, becoming a tiny, rounded pellet of granular snow. This is firn, a substance that is no longer fresh snow, but not yet solid. Ice. The weight of countless new layers above presses down. The air between these granules is slowly squeezed out. The granules themselves are compressed, and they begin to fuse together. They recrystallize into a dense, solid mass. This process is achingly slow. It can take decades, even centuries, for the snow of one winter to be transformed into a clear, deep blue ice. Our snowflake has now lost its identity. It has become part of the ice. It is now a single molecule in a body that is growing, spreading, and, crucially, beginning to move. For ice, under sufficient pressure, ceases to be a brittle solid. It behaves like a plastic. It flows. When the ice mass thickens beyond about 50 meters, the incredible weight of the overlying ice creates immense pressure at its base. This pressure lowers the melting point of the ice, creating a thin film of meltwater that allows the entire mass to slide ever so slowly over its bedrock foundation. But more profoundly, the ice itself begins to deform internally, flowing outwards under its own weight, like a dollop of honey spreading on a table. This is the awakening of the glacier. It is no longer a passive pile of snow. It is a dynamic entity. It is advancing. Now, imagine this process not in a single valley, but across an entire continent. The Laurentide ice sheet did not form from one glacier, but from many, from countless accumulation zones across the high Canadian Shield. Smaller ice caps and alpine glaciers grew, merged, and coalesced into a single monstrous dome of ice. A dome that was over 3 kilometers thick in the center near Hudson Bay. The pressure at its base was so immense that it depressed the actual crust of the Earth, pushing it down into the malleable mantle below. The advance is not a smooth, gentle push. It is a relentless, crushing crawl. At its edges, the ice is fractured into deep crevasses. and Sirax, it quarries the landscape beneath it. As it moves, it plucks giant boulders from the bedrock, freezing onto them and dragging them along. It grinds the stone beneath into a fine powder called rock flour, which turns meltwater rivers a stunning milky blue-green. It scratches long, parallel grooves into the bedrock, glacial striations, a permanent record of its passage like the claw marks of a giant. And all of this continent-altering force, began with a snowflake, with a summer that was just a little too cool, with a winter that deposited just a little more snow than could melt. It is a truth written into the very heart of ice. Immense power can arise from almost unimaginable patience and the accumulation of tiny, fragile things. The ice sheet is a lesson in compound interest on a geological scale. A single year's snow means nothing, but 1,000 years of surplus, that can build a mountain of ice, that can change the world. Our snowflake, now deep within the ice, is under immense pressure. It holds within its frozen structure a tiny bubble of the ancient atmosphere it fell through. It is a time capsule waiting. It will travel slowly with the ice for thousands of years towards the edge of the sheet, where it will finally melt and release its secret back into the world. But for now, the advance continues. The world is cooling, the ice is growing, and we are only just beginning to understand the profound effects this sleeping giant will have on the rest of the planet. Next time, we will see what happens to the world's oceans when so much water is locked away on land. We will watch the seas retreat and new lands and new pathways for life emerge from the waves. In our last moment together, we witnessed the ice sheets growing, pulling billions of tons of water from the oceans and locking it away on land. But this act of subtraction is also an act of creation. For every inch the ice climbs skyward, the sea level falls, and as the waters retreat, they reveal a hidden world, a lost geography that would shape the destiny of species, including our own. Tonight, we explore the world of lowered seas. We walk the forgotten bridges that connected continents and follow the paths of the first pioneers into new worlds. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. At the peak of the last ice age, with so much water frozen in the immense Laurentide and Fennoscandian ice sheets, global sea level was about 120 meters, or 400 feet, lower than it is today. Imagine the ocean emptying out, revealing a map utterly transformed. Coastlines were not just slightly extended, they were radically redrawn. Continental shelves, the gently sloping plains that surround continents, were suddenly exposed. These were not barren underwater deserts, but fertile, ecologically rich lands that had been drowned by the rising seas of a previous interglacial. As the sea fell, these lands were reborn, creating vast new territories overnight, in geological terms. The most famous of these new highways is Beringia. Today, the Bering Strait separates Alaska from Siberia by a narrow channel of treacherous, icy water. But when the seas dropped, this gateway closed. What emerged was a land bridge, not a narrow isthmus, but a continent-sized subcontinent, over 1,000 miles wide from north to south. This was not a barren, icy wasteland, but a vast, productive grassland steppe, teeming with life. Mammoths, bison, lions, and muskoxen grazed its wind-swept plains. And following the game came people, groups of Paleolithic hunters moving ever eastward from Siberia walked across this bridge. They were not conquering a new world. They were simply following the seasons, the herds, and the resources of a continuous landscape. They had no concept they were entering a new continent. They were simply walking on land. With every step, they were populating the Americas. Beringia was the doorway, and the Ice Age held it open for millennia. On the other side of the world, another vast expanse emerged. Sunderland. The islands of Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Borneo, were not islands at all. They were the highlands of a huge, low-lying peninsula jutting out from mainland Southeast Asia. The South China Sea became a great plain, and the island of Bali was connected to the island of Lombok, breaching the deep water trench known as Wallace's Line, allowing species to mix in ways they never could before. This connected tropical world allowed early humans to spread throughout Southeast Asia and eventually make the short water crossing to Australia, which itself was connected to New Guinea and Tasmania in a continent known as Sahul. And in the heart of what is now Europe, there was Doggerland. Imagine the North Sea not as water, but as a lowland of hills, marshes, rivers, and dense forests. It connected the British Isles seamlessly to the European continent. Herds of reindeer and giant elk roamed its valleys, and Mesolithic hunter-gatherers settled its rich lands, leaving behind the footprints and spear-throwers we find today on the seabed. It was a heartland, a thriving, populated region. This was the power of the ice. It was a global sculptor of geography. It didn't just create ice sheets. It created new continents, new pathways, new opportunities for life to spread and mingle. It rewired the entire map of the planet. For humans, these land bridges were everything. They were the roots of our greatest migrations. They allowed us to become a global species. The settlement of the Americas, of Australia, of the British Isles. All of these stories were written on the dry, frozen ground that the Ice Age provided. But this revealed world was temporary. It was borrowed land. The bridges existed on a knife's edge, maintained only by the immense volume of water locked away in the ice. And when the world warmed and the ice began to melt, the water would return. It would reclaim these lands, drowning the forests, the hills, and the hunting grounds and isolating populations forever. The story of Doggerland would end not with a freeze, but with a flood, a rapid, catastrophic drowning that would turn hills into islands and then into legends before vanishing beneath the waves for good. But that is a story of an ending. For now, in the heart of the Ice Age, the bridges are open, the pathways are clear. The world is connected in ways we can scarcely imagine today. We are standing on the shores of a new world, watching the sea retreat, beckoning us to walk into the unknown. Next time, we will take a grand tour of this glacial world, from the tundra of Paris to the arid expanses of the Sahara. A planet in the grip of ice. In our last journey, we walked the land bridges, the highways revealed by the fallen seas. But these were not isolated changes. The entire planet was transformed. The ice sheets were the heart of the cold, but the chill reached every corner of the globe. The world was locked in a different state. Tonight, we take a tour of the Earth at the last glacial maximum. We visit familiar places made strange, and see how the grip of ice altered climates far from the glaciers themselves. We begin in Europe. The great Fennoscandian ice sheet sits like a cap over the north, but its influence stretches far to the south. What is now the lush, temperate landscape of France, Germany, and the British Isles is a cold, dry, steppe tundra, much like modern-day Siberia. This is polar desert. Paris is not a city of cafes. It is a vast, open landscape of hardy grasses and low shrubs where reindeer graze and the wind scours the frozen ground. Winters are interminable and brutally cold. Summers are brief and cool, never warm enough to allow forests to take hold. The permafrost is deep here, and the only trees are dwarf willows and birches clinging to life in sheltered river valleys. Now let us travel south to the Mediterranean. One might expect to find a refuge here, a pocket of warmth. But the climate has shifted south with the ice. While not glaciated, the Mediterranean basin is cooler and much drier. The great rivers are diminished. What will become the olive groves and vineyards of Tuscany and Greece is a landscape of sparse, open woodlands and scrubby grasslands. It is a harder, leaner world. The change is even more dramatic when we journey to the Sahara. Today, it is the world's largest hot desert. Then it was something else entirely. The global cooling had disrupted weather patterns, shifting the monsoon belts. The result? The Sahara was not a sea of sand, but a cool, semi-arid grassland, dotted with lakes and crossed by seasonal rivers. Hippos bathed in lakes that are now buried under dunes. Herds of antelope, gazelle, and even buffalo roamed where today there is only emptiness. The Sahara was a haven for life, a green corridor between the tropics and the Mediterranean. This pattern holds across the globe. In North America, south of the immense Laurentide ice sheet, the same cold, dry steppe dominates. In the American Southwest, the great sandstone arches we know today stood over a landscape that was cooler and wetter, with sprawling pluvial lakes filled by rain that now rarely falls. Lake Bonneville, the ancestor of the Great Salt Lake, was a vast inland sea, deeper than 300 meters, covering much of modern-day Utah. Even the tropics felt the change. The Amazon rainforest did not disappear, but it was stressed. Cooler and drier conditions caused the forest to contract, replaced in many areas by savannas and dry woodlands. This fragmentation created isolated islands of jungle, each becoming a unique crucible of evolution. The Congo Basin in Africa experienced a similar contraction. The planet's great lungs breathed a little shallower. In the southern hemisphere, the Patagonian ice sheet capped the Andes, and New Zealand's southern Alps were buried under ice. Australia became even drier and windier than it is today, its interior deserts expanding, pushing human and animal populations closer to the coasts. This is the true meaning of an ice age. It was not merely the advancement of ice over Canada and Scandinavia, it was a global climatic upheaval. It was a planet-wide drying and cooling. It was a shift in atmospheric circulation, in ocean currents, in rainfall patterns. It was a world where deserts bloomed and rainforests retreated, where tundra stretched across Europe and lions roamed in a green Sahara. It was a world of paradoxes, lushness in the most unexpected places and utter barrenness in others. A planet holding its breath. For the species that lived through it, this was the only world they knew. It was a world of challenges, but also of opportunities. New corridors opened, new habitats emerged. Life, as it always does, found a way to adapt, to persist, to carve out a living in this colder, drier, and infinitely more dramatic Earth. But how? How did life survive in this world of ice and dry wind? That is a story of incredible adaptation, a story for our next chapter. Next time, we will meet the specialists of the ice, the creatures that not only survived the cold, but thrived in it, the giants of the mammoth steppe. We have toured the Ice Age world, seen its continents transformed, its climates shifted, but a landscape, no matter how grand, is empty without life. And the Pleistocene was anything but empty. It was a world roaring, grazing, and hunting with a vitality that seems to defy the cold. How did they do it? How does life not just survive, but thrive on the very edge of an ice sheet? Tonight, we explore the art of survival in a world of ice. We look at the incredible adaptations, the clever strategies, and the hidden sanctuaries that allowed life to weather the long winter. The first and most obvious answer is the physical suit of armor. The megafauna were masterpieces of evolutionary engineering sculpted by the relentless cold. The woolly mammoth was draped in a long, shaggy outer coat of guard hairs, some nearly a meter long, and beneath that a dense, woolly undercoat for insulation, a thatch roof over a downy blanket. Their small ears and short tails were not a design flaw, they were a crucial conservation of heat. A layer of fat up to 8 centimeters thick covered their bodies like a thermal buffer against the wind. The woolly rhinoceros sported a similar outfit of thick, long hair and a hefty build. Even predators like the cave lion developed thicker, more robust frames and denser fur than their modern relatives, a necessary adaptation for conserving energy on the open, windy plains. But survival was about more than just fur coats. It was about finding food in a landscape that offered little for much of the year. The mammoth steppe was not a barren wasteland. It was a productive, if tough, grassland. Animals became specialists. The bizarre trumpet-nosed saiga antelope evolved its oversized nasal passages to warm the frigid air before it reached its lungs. The giant Irish elk, with its immense palmate antlers, likely used them as snow shovels, clearing away the powder to reach the life-sustaining vegetation underneath. Behavior was just as important as biology. Many species developed profound migratory patterns, moving hundreds of miles to follow the seasonal growth of grasses or the calving grounds of prey. Herding behavior provided warmth and protection. A muskox forming a defensive circle, a mammoth calf sheltered in the center of the group from the worst of the wind. But what of the plants? How did they survive the dry, frozen wind? They too adapted. Grasses grew low and tough, hugging the ground. They developed deep, tenacious root systems to access frozen water and to store energy through the long darkness. They were perennial, coming back from their roots year after year, ready to seize the brief summer to flower and seed. Yet even with these brilliant adaptations, there were places too harsh, too cold, too buried under ice. This is where the second, more secretive act of our story takes place. The concept of refugia. A refugium is a sanctuary, a place where climatic conditions remain relatively tolerable, even during the worst of the glacial periods, acting as a lifeboat. They were arcs, carrying the biological legacy of a region through the long winter, allowing species to survive in a much smaller range before expanding again when the climate improved. These sanctuaries took many forms. In North America, areas south of the ice sheets like the Pacific Northwest or parts of the American Southwest acted as refugia for coniferous forests and the animals that depended on them. In Europe, as the ice advanced from the north, life was pushed south, finding shelter in the mountain valleys of the Alps, the Pyrenees, and most importantly, in the Iberian, Italian, and Balkan peninsulas. These three areas became isolated pockets of genetic diversity where species waited out the cold. But refugia weren't just on land. The exposure of the Bering Land Bridge created a new, vast habitat, Beringia itself, that acted as a refuge for the hardy steppe plants and animals, separate from the populations in the rest of Asia and America. In the tropics, the story flipped. While the north was fighting cold, the tropics battled aridity. The great Amazon and Congo rainforests fractured. Small, wetter pockets of jungle persisted in a sea of expanding savanna. These rainforest refugia became isolated islands, each fostering its own unique evolutionary path for thousands of years. When the rains returned, these pockets would expand and merge again, but the genetic signature of their separation remains etched in the DNA of the species that live there today. This is the deep, rhythmic pulse of the ice ages, contraction and expansion, not just of ice, but of life itself. Species would be squeezed into their refugia, their numbers dwindling, their world suo xiao to a sanctuary. Then, as the world warmed and the ice retreated, they would explode outward, recolonizing the newly available land, a great green wave surging. Back across the continents, life did not merely endure the ice age, it danced with it, it adapted, it retreated, it waited, and it advanced. It was a perpetual, dynamic struggle, a testament to the breathtaking tenacity of the living world. Next time, we will look at the most powerful sculptor of this icy world. Not the cold, but the ice itself in motion. We will follow the silent, relentless flow of the glaciers that carved the very ground beneath our feet. In our last chapter, we witnessed life adapting, waiting, and persisting on the margins of the ice. But now, we turn our attention to the great force that defined those margins. We have called them ice sheets, frozen monoliths. But that is a static term for a dynamic entity. They are not still. They are alive with motion. They are the silent rivers of ice. Tonight we learn the language of glaciers. We will understand how they flow, how they carve, and how they transform a familiar landscape into something entirely new, creating the geography of tomorrow. From a distance, a glacier seems a permanent frozen monument. But this is an illusion. It is a river flowing in ultra-slow motion. This movement begins with the immense, crushing weight of the ice itself. When ice piles higher than about 50 meters, the pressure at its base becomes so enormous that the very nature of the ice changes. It begins to behave like a plastic, not brittle, but malleable. The ice crystals within it realign and slide past one another in a process called internal deformation. The entire mass slowly oozes outward from its center like a dollop of honey spreading on a table. This is the first way a glacier moves. But there is a second, more dramatic way. The immense pressure at the base of the ice lowers its melting point. This creates a thin film of meltwater between the glacier and the bedrock below. This water acts as a lubricant, allowing the entire colossal mass to slide over its foundation. This is basal slip. When you hear the deep, thundering groan of a glacier, that is the sound of basal slip, the sound of a continent of ice grinding its way over stone. Now, armed with this motion, the glacier becomes not just a blanket, but the most powerful geological sculptor on the planet. Its tools are simple, but its force is unimaginable. The first tool is plucking. As the glacier slides, it melts and refreezes around the bedrock beneath it. It freezes onto the lee side of a rocky hill, and as it moves forward, it literally quarries and plucks entire boulders from the earth, incorporating them into its icy body. It is a geological thief, stealing the very bones of the landscape. The second tool is abrasion. Now the glacier has its tools, the rocks and boulders it has plucked. They are frozen into its base like sandpaper on a giant's sander. As the glacier flows, it grinds these rocks against the bedrock beneath, scouring and polishing it. This creates long, parallel scratches and grooves called glacial striations. If you ever run your hand over a smooth, scratched outcrop of bedrock, you are touching the signature of the ice, the literal scratch marks from a tool that was miles thick and millions of years old. This relentless scouring has a result. It pulverizes rock into a fine, powdery sediment called rock flour. So much rock is ground that when the glacier melts, its meltwater rivers flow a stunning, opaque, milky blue-green, the color of suspended rock flour catching the light. It is the color of creation, of landscapes being remade. And what does this sculptor create? It does not merely wear down, it builds up. As the glacier moves, it acts like a colossal conveyor belt, carrying all the material it has plucked and scraped, from fine flour to house-sized boulders, within its ice. When the glacier finally melts, it drops this entire load in a chaotic pile called a moraine. These long, ridged hills are the dump trucks of the Ice Age, marking the glacier's former boundaries, but the true masterpieces are carved into negative space. The glacier doesn't just pile up, it digs down. In its mountain origins, it scours away at the rock at the head of a valley, carving a deep, amphitheater-shaped hollow called a cirque. As multiple glaciers flow down from adjacent cirques, they carve the mountain into a sharp, horn-like peak, a horn like the Matterhorn. and the valleys themselves are transformed. A river cuts a V-shaped valley, sharp and narrow, but a glacier, a mile thick, does not cut. It bulldozes, it widens and deepens the valley into a broad, steep-sided, U-shaped trough. When the ice is gone, the valley feels immense, overpowering, a monument to the scale of the force that occupied it. And if that U-shaped valley is at the coast, the sea will flood in, creating a fjord, those deep, majestic, cliff-lined waterways of Norway, New Zealand, and Chile. They are not coastal features. They are glacial valleys drowned. Everywhere we look in the northern latitudes, we see the handiwork of these silent rivers. The gentle, rolling hills of the Midwest are ground moraine. The deep, freshwater lakes of Canada and Minnesota are kettle lakes, formed when buried blocks of glacial ice melted. The Great Lakes themselves are the scooped-out basins of pre-glacial river valleys vastly enlarged and deepened by the ice. The glacier is a geological architect. It is a destructive force, yes, but also an intensely creative one. It tears down the old world to create a new one of breathtaking beauty and diversity. It is the silent river that, in its slow, patient flow, writes the future upon the stones of the past. Next time, we will witness the end of its flow. We will see what happens when the great thaw begins. The story of the ice does not end with stillness, but with a torrent, a release of water so colossal it reshapes the world in a matter of days. For 100,000 years, the silence has been profound. The world has been held in a deep, white sleep. But nothing, not even an ice age, lasts forever. The great clockwork of the heavens continues to turn. The wobble, the tilt, the stretch of our orbit, they have shifted, ever so slightly. The nudge has been given. The Earth is about to wake up. Tonight, we witness the great thaw. We see how a whisper of extra sunlight can unravel a continent of ice, triggering a cascade of feedback loops that brings the world back to life. It begins, as it always does, with a change in the light. The Milankovitch cycles have shifted. A slight increase in the tilt of Earth's axis, or a different alignment in its orbit, means that the high northern latitudes, the very heart of the ice sheets, begin to receive a little more summer sun. Not a flood of warmth, just a few more watts of energy per square meter. A barely perceptible change, but for the ice, it is enough. That extra energy means that for the first time in millennia, the summer melt begins to outpace the winter snowfall. The edges of the great ice sheets, which for so long have been zones of accumulation, become zones of ablation, of loss. The snow line retreats. Dark, rocky ground is exposed along the fringes, and here is where the process becomes a runaway train. This is the power of albedo. The brilliant white ice and snow that once reflected up to 90% of the sun's energy back into space is now replaced by dark rock, soil, and water. These dark surfaces are greedy. They absorb the sun's heat. The local air begins to warm. This warming melts more ice, which exposes more dark ground, which absorbs more heat, which melts more ice. This is a positive feedback loop, and it is breathtakingly powerful. What began as a subtle orbital suggestion is now an unstoppable, self-fueling engine of melting. The ice is now helping to destroy itself, but the atmosphere soon joins the revolt. As the planet warms, the great carbon cycle, which had been locked down during the cold, begins to reverse. The cold oceans, which had acted as a vast sponge for carbon dioxide, now begin to warm. And just like a warm glass of soda, they begin to outgas their stored CO2 back into the atmosphere. This is the second, and perhaps most crucial, feedback loop. As CO2 levels rise, the planet's greenhouse blanket thickens. The world traps more of the sun's heat, accelerating the warming globally, which in turn melts more ice. which further reduces albedo, and on it goes. The proof of this is locked in the ice cores. Temperature and CO2 rise together in a perfect, terrifying dance of mutual amplification. The sleeping giant is not just waking, it is stirring with increasing urgency. The meltwater now flows in great rivulets across the surface of the ice, gathering into streams and then plunging into the depths through mighty shafts called moulins. This water funnels to the base of the ice sheet, where it acts as a super lubricant, dramatically accelerating the basal slip of the glacier. The great ice rivers begin to surge towards the sea, their flow becoming unstable, chaotic, and at the edges where the ice meets the ocean, a new front of battle opens. Warming seawater begins to lap at the floating ice shelves that buttress the glaciers on land. From above and below, the ice is attacked. Immense chunks carve off into the sea with a sound like thunder, becoming the icebergs that will drift into the shipping lanes of the future. This is the great thaw. It is not a gentle, uniform warming. It is a violent, chaotic, and dramatic unraveling. It is the collapse of a world that had seemed eternal. The geography that had been frozen in place for millennia is suddenly in motion. The land, once pressed down by the immense weight of the ice, begins to rebound, rising slowly like a sleeper stretching after a long rest. The earth is waking up. The silence of the ice age is being replaced by a new symphony of sound. The drip of meltwater, the roar of subglacial rivers, the crash of carving ice, and the rush of the wind over newly exposed earth. It is a sound of transformation, of destruction, but also of creation. For the world that is being unmade is also the world that is being reborn, but this rebirth will not be gentle. The awakening of a giant is a messy, catastrophic, and magnificent event. The water locked away on land for 100,000 years is about to return to the sea, and it will not go quietly. Next time we will witness the flood, a torrent of water, so colossal it will carve landscapes in weeks that rivers would need millennia to shape. The legendary Spokane floods and the scars they left on the world. The great thaw we witnessed is not a gentle, steady drip. It is a violent unraveling, and sometimes that violence is not gradual. Sometimes it is unleashed in a single catastrophic event, a fury of water so immense, so powerful, that it defies human imagination. This is the story of the Ice Age's most dramatic awakening, the story of the mega-floods. Tonight we journey to a place where the landscape itself is the testament to a deluge of geological proportions. As the great ice sheets retreated, they left behind not just land, but colossal, precarious dams of ice. One such dam, over half a mile high, plugged the Clark Fork River in what is now northern Idaho. Behind it, meltwater from the retreating Cordilleran ice sheet began to pool, and pool, and pool. This was not a lake. It was an inland sea, glacial. Lake Missoula. It stretched over 3,000 square miles, holding more than 500 cubic miles of water. That is half the volume of today's Lake Michigan, and it was all held back by a wall of ice. And then the dam broke. It likely didn't just crack, it likely failed catastrophically. The buoyant pressure of the deep water, the warming climate, a minor earthquake, the trigger doesn't matter. The result was Armageddon. The ice dam exploded outward. The entire contents of Lake Missoula were released in a matter of days, perhaps even hours. A wall of water and ice, hundreds of feet high, rampaged across the landscape of eastern Washington, at speeds approaching 80 miles per hour. This was not a flood. It was a tidal wave traveling across the land. The force was beyond comprehension. The flow rate was 10 times the combined flow of all the rivers in the world today. The water was not clear, It was a viscous, churning slurry of ice blocks, rock, and debris, a bulldozer of liquid sandpaper. It hit the basaltic plateau of the Columbia Basin like a hammer. The flood did not flow around the hills, it simply tore through them. It ripped out 200-foot-deep canyons called coulees in a matter of days. It plucked giant basalt boulders from the bedrock and carried them miles away. It carved gigantic potholes into the solid rock, some large enough to hold a house, as swirling whirlpools drilled down with the force of abrasive slurry. It created waterfalls that made Niagara look like a trickle. Dry Falls in central Washington is a 3-mile-wide crescent cliff. Today, it is silent and dry. But during the flood, it was the largest waterfall that ever existed, with a flow that was 10 times that of all the world's current rivers combined, plunging 400 feet into a turbulent plunge pool below. The water raged on, funneling down the Columbia River Gorge, where it further scoured and widened the passage. It backed up in the Willamette Valley in Oregon, depositing 300 feet of rich silt and dropping icebergs that had rafted giant boulders from Montana and Canada. The erratics that now sit in the valleys of Oregon are the drop stones from this incredible event. And then it was over. The lake was drained. The flood subsided. But the story doesn't end there. The Ice Age wasn't finished. The ice dam slowly began to reform. The glacial ice flowed back into the gap, once again plugging the Clark Fork River. Meltwater began to collect again. Lake Missoula refilled, and it happened again and again. Geologists now believe this catastrophic cycle repeated dozens, perhaps even 100 times over a period of 2,000 years. Each time, the ice dam would fail, unleashing a titanic flood that would rip across the landscape, each pass carving the scars a little deeper. The landscape we see today in the channeled scablands is not the work of a single flood, but of a rhythmic, terrifying pounding, a landscape beaten into shape by the fist of a dying ice age. The scablands are the most famous example, but they were not alone. Similar glacial lake outburst floods happened across the continent. Lake Agassiz, an even larger lake dammed by the Laurentide ice sheet over central Canada, drained catastrophically into the Atlantic multiple times, each event potentially altering ocean circulation and global climate. These megafloods are a stark reminder that climate change is not always slow. It can have tipping points of terrifying speed and violence. The Earth, when it wakes from a long sleep, does not always stretch gently. It can shudder, and in its shuddering, remake the world. In an instant, the flood subsided. The water drained into the Pacific. The land began to steam in the new sun. And in the silence that followed, a new world was left behind. A world of deeply scarred, barren rock, but also a world ready to be colonized. The Great Melt was entering its final act. Next time, we will watch the seas themselves return, rising to drown the continents and reclaim the land bridges we once walked. The Great Melt continues. We have witnessed the fury of the megafloods, the catastrophic releases of water that scarred the continent. But that water had to go somewhere. It joined a global tide that was rising, not in a gentle, lapping rhythm, but in a relentless, inexorable surge. This was not a filling, it was an inundation. Tonight, we follow the meltwater to the sea. We watch as the world's coastlines are rewritten, not over centuries, but in a human lifetime. We listen for the stories of the lands that were lost beneath the waves. For thousands of years, the ice had been a thief, locking away ocean water in its frozen vault. Now, it was all being returned. The Great Melt was a global event, and the oceans rose to claim their stolen water back. This was not a smooth, linear process. It came in pulses. Periods of relative stability were shattered by rapid, catastrophic jumps in sea level known as meltwater pulses. The most dramatic, meltwater, Pulse 1A, occurred about 14,500 years ago. The latest research suggests sea levels rose by over 20 meters, that's more than 60 feet, in a span of just 400 years. That is an average of 5 centimeters, 2 inches per year. But it would not have been average. It would have been periods of terrifying rapid invasion. Imagine being a Paleolithic hunter living on a coastal plain. The world you know is already changing, the climate is shifting, the herds are moving. And then you notice the sea. It doesn't just come in at high tide and leave, it comes in and it stays. The familiar salt marsh where you gathered shellfish is gone, replaced by open water. The river valley that led to your favorite hunting ground is now a broad, salty inlet. Each spring, the water is farther up the beach. Within a generation, the hill that gave your camp a view of the interior becomes an island. Within a few more, it is a submerged reef, a memory known only to the elders. The world's map was remade with brutal efficiency. The most profound losses were the great continental shelves, the fertile, low-lying plains that had been the heartland of human and animal migration. Sunderland, the vast continent that connected Indonesia and Southeast Asia, was drowned. The rich plains that early humans had walked for millennia were dissected, first into a vast archipelago, and then, as the waters kept rising, into the scattered islands we know today. Entire cultures, entire ways of life were fragmented and isolated. By the rising tide in the North Sea, the fate of Doggerland was sealed. This was not a land bridge, but a heartland, a populated, resource-rich country of hills, rivers, forests, and lagoons that connected Britain to Europe. As the waters rose, it shrank, the hunting grounds vanished. The freshwater lakes became brackish, then salty. Communities were forced to retreat again and again, watching their world vanish meter by meter, year by year, until the highest hills became the Dogger Banks, and then, finally, those too were swallowed. The North Sea was born, and a continent was cut in two, creating the island of Britain. The same story played out on every coast. The Persian Gulf was a fertile river valley that flooded. The coasts of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico retreated miles inland. Australia was separated from New Guinea and Tasmania, isolating its unique fauna forever. This was the great global drowning. But the water did more than just drown land. It changed the very character of the continents. As the sea rose, it poured into the deep, U-shaped valleys that the glaciers had carved along the coasts. These valleys, once filled with ice, were now flooded with seawater, creating the majestic fjords of Norway, Chile, and New Zealand. The rising waters also found the low points on the planet's surface, spilling into basins to form new seas. The Black Sea, which may have been a much smaller freshwater lake, was suddenly breached by the rising Mediterranean in a catastrophic flood that would live on in myth as the Deluge of Deucalion or Noah's Flood. The Great Melt was the final, decisive act of the Ice Age's end. It was a drawn-out, world-altering event that would have been a daily, visible trauma for the people living through it. Their entire cosmological understanding would have been shaped by this relentless, hungry water. The world we know, our continents, our islands, our coastlines, is not the normal one. It is the product of this recent and geologically rapid remapping. Every time we look at a map, we are seeing the aftermath of the Great Melt. Every continental shelf holds a secret landscape, a world of sunken forests, drowned river valleys, and the forgotten paths of our ancestors. They are down there still, beneath the waves, silent archives of a lost world. The ice had given up its water. The oceans had taken their revenge, and a new, warmer, wetter, and more isolated world was left in its place. Next time, we will see what grew in this new world. As the ice retreated and the seas stabilized, a great green surge of life followed in its wake, reclaiming the bare ground and building the ecosystems we recognize today. The ice has retreated, the mega floods have subsided, the seas have risen and found their new, higher shores. The great unraveling is over, but what remains is a barren world. A world scraped clean, waiting. The stage is empty. The violence of the ice is gone, replaced by a new silence, but nature abhors a vacuum. Tonight we witness the great comeback, the patient, relentless, and beautiful recolonization of the land. This is not a story of dramatic events, but of quiet persistence, the story of the green surge that clothed a naked world. The first pioneers are the humblest of life forms, lichens and mosses. They need no soil. They can anchor themselves to bare rock. Slowly, imperceptibly, they begin to work their magic. They secrete acids that break down the rock grain by grain. When they die, their organic matter mixes with this mineral grit. After decades, perhaps centuries, a thin, dusty soil begins to form. It is a foothold. With this tiny foothold, the next wave arrives. Hardy, wind-blown grasses and sedges take root in the shallow pockets of new soil. Their roots push deeper, breaking the rock further, and when they die, they add their bodies to the earth, building it up, making it richer. Herbs and low shrubs follow, dwarf willows, dryas, and Arctic poppies that can withstand the still, harsh conditions. They huddle together, creating miniature windbreaks and trapping moisture. This is the first ecosystem, the tundra. It is a thin, living skin stretched over the wounds left by the ice. But it is enough. It provides food and shelter, and it brings the first animals back. Insects arrive to pollinate the flowers. Lemmings and voles burrow in the new turf. Ground-nesting birds like ptarmigan find a home. Their droppings and their lives add more nutrients to the soil. The stage is now set for the main event. The trees are coming. They advance not in a steady march, but in a slow, creeping migration. Their seeds are carried by the wind, by rivers, and by animals. They follow the retreating ice northward, generation by generation. First come the pioneer species, the tough, fast-growing and sun-loving trees like aspens and birches. They are not picky. They spread quickly, their light canopy creating dappled shade on the ground below. This shade, and the deeper, richer leaf, litter they drop, creates a new microclimate. It is cooler, moister, and more protected, and these new conditions are perfect. For the next wave, the conifers. The spruces, firs, and pines move in under the pioneer canopy. They are shade-tolerant and long-lived. They grow slowly but surely, eventually overtopping the shorter-lived birches and aspens, forming a dense, evergreen canopy. A true boreal forest has been born. The taiga. It becomes a new, immense ecosystem, a swath of green that circles the entire northern hemisphere, reclaiming the land that was, for so long, buried under white. But the story is not the same everywhere. In the areas that were under the thickest ice, like the Canadian Shield or Scandinavia, the land is still rebounding from the immense weight rising out of the sea. Here, the process of succession is still happening today, a live performance of the green surge we can still witness. In other places, the melting ice left behind a chaotic mess of water. As the last buried blocks of glacial ice melted, they left behind depressions that filled with water, creating thousands upon thousands of kettle lakes. Around their edges, a different kind of ecosystem emerged, the peatland. Sphagnum mosses grew in the waterlogged, acidic conditions, forming bogs and fens that preserved organic matter in a cold, anaerobic embrace, storing vast amounts of carbon that had once been in the atmosphere. This was the great transformation. The world was not just warming, it was greening. The albedo of the planet was changing once again, but this time the dark green of forests was absorbing the sun's heat, reinforcing the warming trend. The Earth was creating its own new, stable state for the animals and humans who lived through it. This was a time of incredible opportunity and dramatic change. The mammoth steppe, the vast grassland of the Ice Age, was shrinking, replaced by thick, impenetrable forest. This was a disaster for the giants like the mammoth and woolly rhino who needed open spaces to graze, but it was a boon for forest dwellers like deer, elk, and boar. The green surge was a rebirth. It was life, armed with incredible patience and adaptability, returning to a world scoured clean. It is a process that continues all around us. Every forest, every meadow, every peat bog is part of this ongoing reclamation. They are not static. They are the current expression of a surge that began when the ice last retreated. We are living in the world that the green surge built, a world of deep forests, fertile plains, and abundant life. It is the positive counterpart to the ice's destruction. The great thaw did not just bring floods. It brought the soil, the seeds, and the sun that allowed the world to bloom again. Next time, we will meet the most successful opportunists of this new green world, a species that did not just adapt to the change, but learned to shape it. The rise of humanity in the Holocene. The world was transforming. Ice gave way to water, tundra to forest, and the old order of giants was fading. In times of great upheaval, the specialists, the creatures perfectly adapted to a single, stable world, often struggle. But the generalists, the flexible, the clever, the adaptable, they find their moment. They become the opportunists. Tonight, we meet the most successful opportunists of the late Pleistocene. We see how a species of primate, armed not with claws or size, but with wit and social connection, not only survived the great thaw, but learned to thrive within it, laying the foundations for the world we know today. For much of the Ice Age, humans were just another part of the ecosystem. We were hunters among hunters, competing with cave lions, scimitar cats, and wolves. But something changed as the climate began to oscillate wildly in the lead-up to the final thaw. The rules of survival were being rewritten daily, and flexibility became the greatest asset of all. This flexibility is etched into the archaeological record through the evolution of tool technology. The simple, robust hand axes of earlier eras gave way to a breathtaking explosion of specialized, refined implements. This was the era of the blade. Using techniques like pressure flaking, toolmakers could now shape long, razor-sharp slivers of stone that were then hafted onto handles to create composite tools, spears, darts, knives, and scrapers. This was a leap in efficiency. A single core of fine flint could now produce multiple lethal tools, each designed for a specific purpose: butchering a carcass, scraping a hide, carving bone. This technological revolution was about more than just hunting. It was about processing. It allowed humans to extract every possible calorie and resource from their environment. Bones could be cracked for marrow. Hides could be cleaned and turned into clothing and shelter, essential for surviving in climates that could swing from bitter cold to moderate warmth within a generation. But tools of stone only tell half the story. The true key to survival was the tool of social connection. The late Pleistocene was a time of increasing social complexity. Evidence of trade networks stretching hundreds of miles appears. Shells from the Mediterranean, found in Central European caves, exotic flints transported far from their source. This implies communication, reciprocity, and alliance. In a changing world, your network was your safety net. Knowledge of which herds were migrating, where new plants were sprouting, or how to navigate a landscape newly revealed by melting ice was information more valuable than any single tool. And then there is the most breathtaking evidence of this: cognitive flourishing, art. In the deep, sacred darkness of caves like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, humans began to paint. They painted the animals they hunted, the ones they feared, and the ones they revered. They were not just drawing what they saw, they were capturing the essence of the animal, its power, its spirit, its movement. This was more than decoration. It was likely a form of magic, a way to assert control over the unpredictable forces of their world, or a way to pass on knowledge through storytelling. They also began to sculpt. The famous Venus figurines, small, portable statues of women with exaggerated features found across Europe, suggest a shared system of symbols and beliefs, possibly related to fertility and the continuity of life in a perilous world. This explosion of culture, the refined tools, the trade networks, the art, points to a modern human mind, a mind capable of symbolic thought, of planning far into the future, of imagining things not just as they are, but as they could be. This cognitive toolkit was the ultimate instrument of adaptation. When the climate shifted, these humans could innovate new hunting strategies. When forests replaced grasslands, they could devise new tools to hunt woodland creatures. When the megafauna grew scarce, they could shift their focus to smaller game, to fishing, to gathering a wider variety of plants. They could store food. For lean times, they could sew fitted clothing to survive colder winters. They were not passive victims of their environment. They were active participants, constantly tweaking and adjusting their relationship with the world around them. They were the ultimate opportunists, turning the chaos of the end of an age into their stage. But our story now approaches a difficult and haunting question. As Homo sapiens thrived, expanding its reach across the globe, many of the iconic giants of the Ice Age, the mammoths, the woolly rhinos, the giant ground sloths, began to vanish. Did the changing climate alone doom them? Or did the rise of the most clever, most adaptable, most efficient predator the world had ever seen play a role in their downfall? The stage is set for one of paleontology's greatest mysteries, the vanishing of the titans. Next time, we will explore the evidence and the enduring mystery of the Quaternary extinction. Was it overkill, overchill, or a perfect storm of both? We have followed the story of the ice, the climate, and the rise of humanity. But now we must turn to the great, echoing silence that lies at the heart of our modern world. A silence where there was once thunder, an emptiness where there was once majesty. Tonight we do not study bones, we resurrect them. We paint a portrait of the world we lost. We meet the titans of the Pleistocene, not as fossils, but as living, breathing, roaring inhabitants of a planet that was wilder, grander, and more awe-inspiring than we can possibly imagine. Close your eyes and listen. Can you hear it? The deep, resonant shudder of the ground? That is the approach of a herd of woolly mammoths. Not just one or two, but dozens, their shaggy, auburn coats dusted with frost, their immense curved tusks, weapons, tools, and snowplows gleaming in the low sun. They are the emperors of the steppe, moving with a slow, deliberate gravity that shakes the earth. A calf, trailing its mother, lets out a high trumpeting call, a sound that would have been as common then as a bird song is to us. But look, there, browsing at the edge of a sparse larch forest, is a different giant. The American mastodon, is not a mammoth. He is stockier, lower to the ground, with a different, simpler tooth structure for chewing the branches of conifers. He is a creature of the forest edge, a shadowy browser where the mammoth was a grazer of the open plains. The two colossal cousins sharing a continent but living different lives. Now turn your gaze to the woodlands. A shape moves that seems to defy physics. It is the giant ground sloth, Megalonyx, as large as a modern elephant but built on a different plan. It rises on its powerful hind legs, supported by its massive tail, its long arms and terrifying claws pulling down branches. High in the trees. To see it move is to see a mountain walk. It is slow, deliberate, and utterly formidable. Its sheer size is its defense, and in the grasslands of South America, an even more bizarre giant shuffles the macrochenia, a camel-like creature with the long neck of a llama, but a short, flexible trunk, a unique evolutionary experiment that browsed the pampas. But the titans were not all gentle. This world had its kings. In the north, the American lion, Panthera atrox, larger than any lion. Alive today, a pale, muscular ghost in the tall grass. The short-faced bear, Arctodus simus, a terrifying sprinter that could stand over 11 feet tall, an omnivore whose size likely allowed it to steal kills from lesser predators, and, of course, the most iconic of all, the saber-toothed cat, Smilodon. Not a nimble leopard, but a robust, powerful ambush predator. Its immense, serrated canines were not for biting, but for delivering a single, precise, devastating stab to the neck of its prey. It was a specialist in hunting the giants, its social structure, possibly allowing it to bring down animals many times its size. This was not just a collection of species. It was a complete, functioning ecosystem, a world of giants. The dire wolf hunted in packs, its jaws built for crushing bone. The giant beaver, the size of a black bear, built lodges in the wetlands. The Irish elk, with antlers spanning 12 feet, stood as tall as a moose, its impressive rack a display of fitness in the harsh world. The world felt different with them in it. The very vegetation was shaped by their feeding. Their migrations carved pathways through the wilderness. Their sheer biomass supported a food web more complex and dramatic than anything we know today. The air hummed with their presence. The ground vibrated with their steps. It was a world that had endured for millions of years through countless glacial cycles. The giants had always adapted, always persisted. They were the Pleistocene. And then they were gone. The thunder fell silent. The ground stopped shaking. The great herds vanished, leaving only their bones in the mud of tar pits and riverbeds. The forests grew quiet. The world became smaller, quieter, emptier. We are left with a profound and haunting question. What happened? How could a world so full of life, so robust, so seemingly eternal, simply vanish? Was it the changing climate that ended their reign? Was it the arrival of a new, efficient predator? Or was it something more complex, a perfect storm of change that the titans, for all their might, could not weather? The silence they left behind is one of the greatest mysteries in Earth's history, a mystery we will delve into next time. In our last chapter, we walked with the titans. We felt the ground shake under their weight. Now we stand in the silence they left behind. We are surrounded by the evidence of a profound and tragic mystery, a crime scene on a continental scale. The question is simple, yet the answer has eluded us for centuries. What or who killed the megafauna? This is the great whodunit of the Pleistocene, the case of the vanishing giants. The suspects are few, but the motives are complex, and the evidence is fragmentary, buried for millennia. Tonight we examine the case files. The first suspect is the most obvious and the most controversial, the human predator. This is the overkill hypothesis. The prosecution's case is compelling. Look at the timeline. In continent after continent, the arrival of Homo sapiens is followed, within a startlingly short period, by a wave of extinctions. The giants of Australia vanish around 45,000 years ago, not long after humans arrive. The megafauna of the Americas, disappear around 13,000 years ago, coinciding with the spread of the Clovis culture, the first widespread human culture in North America. The proponents of this theory argue that these animals had never encountered a predator like us. We were intelligent, cooperative, and armed with sophisticated projectile weapons. We were the ultimate invasive species. The giants were naive, and they were slow to reproduce. A mere 2% additional mortality per year from human hunting would have been enough to push them into an irreversible decline over just a few centuries. We didn't need to kill every last mammoth, we just had to tip the balance. But the defense raises reasonable doubt. Is it really plausible that a relatively small number of humans armed with stone-tipped spears could have hunted multiple species to complete extinction across two vast continents? Where is the evidence? While we do find kill sites, mammoths, with Clovis points lodged in their ribs, they are rare. The defense argues the scale of the crime doesn't match the proposed weapon. This brings us to our second suspect, the changing climate, the overchill or overheat hypothesis. The prosecution for this theory lays out a powerful narrative. The end of the Ice Age was not a smooth transition. It was a roller coaster of wild swings, sudden warming periods like the Berling-Allerud, followed by violent reversals like the Younger Dryas cold snap. This wasn't just a change in temperature, it was an ecosystem collapse. The lush, productive mammoth steppe was fragmenting. It was being replaced by less nutritious tundra in the north and dense impenetrable forest in the south. The specialized giants, perfectly adapted to the cold, dry grasslands, found their habitat shrinking and disintegrating. Their food sources vanished. The climate change wasn't just about being too warm, it was about the world becoming unfamiliar. The defense for the overkill theory counters these animals had survived dozens of previous glacial interglacial cycles. Why would this one be any different? Perhaps it was different because of the third scenario, the perfect storm. This is the most nuanced and perhaps most likely theory. It suggests that neither humans nor climate acted alone. Instead, they were accomplices. Imagine a population of mammoths already under severe stress. Their habitat is shrinking, their food is less plentiful, their groups are fragmented, they are weakened, their numbers declining. And then a new, highly efficient predator arrives. Homo sapiens. We didn't need to deliver the killing blow to every species. We just had to be the final critical pressure on populations that were already teetering on the brink. A drought year, a harsh winter, and then a human hunting party taking a few key breeding females. That could be enough to push a local population over the edge. Death by 1,000 cuts, with climate change delivering the first 900. The truth is, the verdict is still out. The evidence is murky. In some places, like the islands of Wrangel and St. Paul, isolated populations of mammoths and other megafauna survived for thousands of years after the mainland extinctions, suggesting that the absence of humans was a bigger factor than climate. In other places, the timing is less clear. This mystery may never be fully solved, but its implications are profound. It forces us to look at our own species and our relationship with the natural world. Were we the innocent bystanders watching a world die around us? Or were we the asteroid, the catastrophic force that reshaped the planet upon our arrival? The extinction of the megafauna was not just the loss of a few species. It was the end of an entire world, the world of giants. It rewired ecosystems on every continent. It left a silence that has never been filled. But the story doesn't end with a slow decline. Some evidence points to a much more dramatic, much more sudden event. A clue that introduces a fourth extraterrestrial suspect into our investigation. Next time, we will examine the most radical theory of all, the Clovis Comet, a day of fire and ice that could have changed the world in an instant. In our investigation of the Great Extinction, we have two main suspects, the human hunter and the changing climate. But what if the truth is stranger? What if the culprit came not from our world, but from the cold void beyond? What if the end of the Ice Age was not a gentle awakening, but a sudden, violent collision? Tonight we examine the most dramatic and controversial theory of them all, a theory that proposes a day of fire and brimstone that reshaped the planet in an instant. This is the story of the Clovis comet. The scene of the crime is a thin, dark layer of sediment found at archaeological sites across North America. It's called the Black Mat. Below it, scientists find the vibrant world of the Pleistocene, mammoth bones, Clovis spear points, and evidence of a thriving ecosystem. Above it, nothing. A stark, barren line. The giants are gone, the Clovis. Culture vanishes. It is a geological tombstone. In the early 2000s, a team of scientists proposed a radical explanation for this black mat. They argued that approximately 12,800 years ago, as the world was warming and humans were spreading, the sky fell. Their theory suggests a fragmented comet, perhaps a few kilometers across, entered Earth's atmosphere. It didn't hit as a single rock. It exploded in a series of airbursts over the North American ice sheet, like the Tunguska event in Siberia, but multiplied 1,000-fold in magnitude. The immediate effects would have been apocalyptic. Firestorms, the kinetic energy of the fragments, raining down would have superheated the atmosphere, instantly igniting vast swathes of the continent. A wall of flame would have raced across forests and grasslands, consuming everything in its path. Then, the winter. The immense plumes of smoke, soot, and dust thrown into the atmosphere would have blotted out the sun for months, perhaps years. This would have triggered an impact winter, a sudden, violent return to glacial conditions. This, they argue, aligns with a known, mysterious cold snap called the Younger Dryas, which abruptly reversed the warming trend for over 1,000 years. It is a cataclysmic story, but is there any physical evidence for such an event? Proponents point to a suite of exotic materials found precisely at the boundary of the black mat. The first clue is nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds that form only under conditions of immense pressure and heat, like those found in an impact or explosion. They are found in that sedimentary layer across the continent. The second clue is shocked quartz crystals with a unique pattern of fracturing that, like nanodiamonds, can only be created by a catastrophic, high-pressure event. The third and most famous clue is iridium, a rare element on Earth's surface but common in asteroids and comets. A spike in iridium was the key piece of evidence that confirmed the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. A similar, though smaller, iridium anomaly has been reported at some Younger Dryas boundary sites. The theory is compelling, dramatic, and terrifying. It provides a single, catastrophic trigger for multiple events: the extinction of the megafauna, who would have been incinerated or starved in the ensuing winter, the disappearance of the Clovis culture, and the onset of the Younger Dryas cold period. But here, our investigation must take a sharp turn, for the Clovis comet hypothesis is one of the most fiercely debated topics in modern science. The skeptics, and there are many, point to serious problems. The evidence has proven difficult to replicate. Some labs find the nanodiamonds and iridium. Others, looking at the exact same sites, do not. Critics argue that the impact materials could have been created by more mundane processes, like widespread wildfires, which we know occurred. There is also the question of the crater. For an event of this proposed magnitude, we would expect to find a smoking gun, a large, unequivocal impact crater dating to that time. None has been found. Proponents suggest the fragments hit the ice sheet, leaving no permanent scar, but this remains a major point of contention. The scientific community is divided. For some, the evidence is convincing enough to support a cosmic catastrophe. For others, it is a classic case of conflating correlation with causation, of finding what you're looking for in a complex geological record. So, where does that leave us? With a magnificent, unproven, and deeply unsettling possibility: the Clovis. Comet hypothesis remains in the realm of possibly, maybe. It is a tantalizing, dramatic idea that solves many puzzles at once. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence so far remains hotly disputed. Whether it was a comet or not, something dramatic did happen 12,800 years ago. The climate did reverse. The megafauna did vanish. The black mat is real. The world did change. Perhaps the truth is a combination of all our suspects. A planet already under stress from climate change and human expansion delivered a final knockout blow from the heavens, a perfect storm of earthly and unearthly proportions. The impact, if it happened, would have been more than a physical event. It would have been a psychological one, seared into the memory of the humans who survived it. A story of a day the sky fell, passed down through generations until it became legend. Next time, we will listen for those echoes. We will explore the myths of great fires and great floods that permeate cultures across the globe and ask if they could be the faded memory of a real world-altering event. We have examined the bones, the ice cores, the geological scars. We have built our case on physical evidence. But what of the other record, the one not written in stone but in story, the one passed down from grandparent to child around a fire for hundreds of generations? Tonight, we step from the realm of carbon dating into the realm of memory. We ask a profound question. Could the echoes of the Ice Age, the giants and the great floods, have persisted in the deepest layers of human myth? Imagine you are a Paleolithic hunter. The world you know is unraveling. The climate is shifting violently. The great herds you depend on are vanishing. And then you witness something unimaginable, a flood so vast it drowns the world you know. Or perhaps you stumble upon the enormous bleached bones of a creature so vast it seems like it could only be a monster from a dream. How would you explain it? You would use the vocabulary you have. You would tell a story across the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Book of Genesis, from the Greek myth of Deucalion to the Maya Popol Vuh. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia share a common story. The story of a great flood, a cataclysmic deluge sent by gods to cleanse the world from which only a few chosen survivors escaped. The details vary, but the core is stunningly consistent. Water rising to cover the land, wiping the slate clean. Is it so difficult to believe that these stories are the cultural memory of the post-glacial sea level rise, of the mega-floods that carved continents? For the people living on those low-lying coastal plains and fertile river valleys, the rising waters would have been a daily, terrifying reality. A slow, inexorable invasion that forced them to retreat again and again for generations. The event was so traumatic, so world-altering, that it became embedded in the foundational myths of virtually every coastal culture on Earth. And what of the giants? Every culture has its legends of giants, the Titans of Greek myth, the Tun of Norse legend, the Nephilim of the Hebrew Bible, the large-bodied ancestors in countless indigenous American and Aboriginal Australian traditions. Now imagine you are a Neolithic farmer ploughing a field in the Fertile Crescent. Your plough strikes something huge and hard. You dig it up to find a thigh bone twice as long as your body and a skull the size of a cauldron with a single massive hole in the center for a trunk. You have just unearthed the skeleton of a woolly mammoth. What would you call it? You would Call it a giant, a cyclops, the remains of a heroic race that walked the earth before humans. The discovery of massive fossil bones has long been used to prove the existence of giants and legendary creatures in the popular imagination. The Greeks likely found dinosaur fossils and created the myth of the monstrous titans. The Chinese dragon may have been inspired by the giant skeletons of prehistoric creatures. The stories of giants are not just fanciful tales, they are likely the first attempts at paleontology. They are the human mind encountering the physical evidence of a lost world and trying to make sense of it through the only lens it had, mythology. Perhaps the most haunting connection is the one between the Clovis comet hypothesis and the universal myths of fire from the sky. Countless cultures tell of a time when the sun was darkened, when the sky fell, when the world was burned and then frozen. The phoenix myth of rebirth from ashes. The Norse Fimbulwinter, a great winter that heralds the end of the world. The Pawnee, legend of a star that fell to earth, causing a great fire. If a series of airbursts did occur over North America 12,800 years ago, the few bands of humans who survived would have carried that story with them. The memory of a day the sky turned to fire, followed by a long, bitter cold, would be seared into their collective consciousness. It would become the ultimate cautionary tale, the defining event of their history. We must be cautious. Drawing direct. Lines between myth and prehistory is a speculative art. Stories change over millennia. They merge, they are borrowed, they are embellished. We can never say for certain that a specific myth is a memory of a specific event. But the sheer prevalence of these themes, the flood, the giant, the fire from the sky, across cultures that could not have communicated with each other, is deeply suggestive. It points to a shared experience, a shared trauma, buried so deep in our past that it has become archetype. Science gives us the dates, the data, the physical proof, but mythology gives us the emotion, the terror, and the awe of those who lived through it. The bones in the ground are one record. The stories we tell are another. Perhaps they are not separate histories, but two different translations of the same incredible events. The Ice Age did not just leave its mark on the landscape, it left its mark on the human psyche. It shaped our oldest stories, our deepest fears, and our sense of a world that was once wilder, stranger, and more full of wonders than we can ever know. Next time, we return to the tangible. We will learn to read the landscape itself, to see the signs of the Ice Age that surround us every day, hidden in plain sight. We have come to the end of our journey. We have traced the ice from a single snowflake to a continent-crushing sheet. We have watched it advance, and we have witnessed its great, chaotic retreat. We have stood in awe of the world it shaped, and the world it took with it. And now we are left with a final, quiet thought. The Ice Age is not over. It is not a closed chapter in a book. It is a cycle, a rhythm as fundamental to this planet as its rotation or its orbit around the sun. The great ice sheets that once covered North America and Europe are gone, but their seeds remain. The ice still clings to Greenland and Antarctica. The glaciers still hold fast in the high Alps and the mighty Himalayas. The giant is not dead. It is sleeping, and one day it will wake again. The great astronomical clock of Milankovitch continues to turn, indifferent to our human concerns. The wobble, the tilt, the stretch of our orbit, these forces will continue their slow, patient dance for millions of years to come. They will once again align in that perfect harmony of cool summers and long winters. The nudge will be given, and the ice will begin to grow. It will start, as it always does, with a snowflake that doesn't melt. Then another and another. The albedo will shift, the feedback loops will engage, and the planet will begin its long, slow exhale into the cold. The forests we know will retreat, replaced by the hardy tundra. The oceans will fall, revealing the lost continents of the continental shelves. The great ice rivers will once again flow, grinding down mountains and carving new valleys. This is the fate of our planet, a rhythm written in the stars. But this time, the story is different. For the first time in Earth's history, a conscious force has intervened in this cycle. Our actions, the trillion tons of carbon we've released, have warmed the world so profoundly that we have likely postponed the next glacial period by tens, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of years. We have stilled the pendulum. For now, what will the next long sleep look like? It will be a world transformed by the one that came before it. The ice will advance over the ghost of our civilization. It will grind down the skyscrapers of New York and London into fine rock. Flour. It will scrape the fields of the Midwest into new moorlands. The Great Lakes will be buried, then reborn in a different form when the ice retreats again, 100,000 years hence. Our legacy will be written in the strangest of ways. Perhaps the only lasting mark of our industrial age will be a thin, global layer of plastic nanoparticles and radioactive dust in the sedimentary rock, a cryptic signal to any future intelligence that something unusual happened here just before the ice returned. This is the humbling perspective of deep time. Our cities, our nations, our art, our wars, they are all fleeting phenomena in the grand breathing of the planet. The ice does not care for our borders or our ambitions. It advances and retreats on a schedule so vast it dwarfs all of human history. And yet, our brief moment in the sun, our Holocene summer, allowed us to look up and understand this rhythm. We learned to read it in the ice cores, in the isotopes, in the rocks. We discovered the clockwork of the ages, and in doing so we became aware of our own power to influence it. We are the first species to hold an ice age in our hands, to be able to delay its arrival. This is not a sign of our dominion over nature, but a testament to our profound responsibility. We have become the keepers of the clock for a little while. So, the sleeping giant will rest a little longer. The long winter is postponed, but the rhythm remains. The pulse of the ice ages is the true heartbeat of this planet over the last 2 million years. Our time is the exception. The ice is the rule. It is a reminder that change is the only constant. That all things, from the smallest glacier to the greatest civilization, are temporary, and that there is a strange, cold comfort in knowing that the world will eventually be made clean again, quiet again, and white again. The story of ice is the story of Earth itself, vast, patient, and cyclical. We have been privileged to live in a warm green moment within it, a moment we must cherish, protect, and understand. For somewhere, deep in the future, the giant is dreaming of its return. Thank you for listening, and good night.